Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville. We're going to invite everybody to join the quorum that is here in O Canada. Thank you, everybody. 210 years ago, Indigenous people here began welcoming settlers from all over the British Empire. Soon, the new settlers were helping slaves escaping from the United States to settle here too. Today, our Indigenous founding partners are still here enjoying the land with us. They fish and camp under their Treaty 22 rights. Indigenous people in their thousands also live with us as neighbors and friends. Our Indigenous white and black settlers created a community with an attractive degree of harmony and prosperity. In 1857, Ontario gave official recognition of Oakville as a town. At Town Hall 160 years later, we fly the flag of the Mississaugas of the Credit beside the flags of Oakville, Ontario, and Canada. We fly these flags together to acknowledge our origins. People from all over the world are attracted to the livability we have created. We offer newcomers a warm spirit of welcome. We offer everyone our founding story so everyone knows what we are part of. We feel sorrow and distress for acts of racism and intolerance suffered across Canada and here at home. We want our future to be equitable and inclusive for all. The path of truth and reconciliation can unite us all. Keep well, stay safe, and let us know of any chance to be helpful to you and yours. Please let us know anytime you can help increase Oakville's harmony, prosperity, and livability. Council, I think we have regrets from Councillor Palmer. Is that right, Madam Clerk? And I think maybe I should ask if any of you have declarations of pecuniary interest. Councillor Adams, your hand is up.
My apologies, not a declaration of pecuniary interest. It was only a hope for a more livable sound system this evening. It appears perhaps when you're leaning back, your sound system is not very clear, and I worry for others who might be watching us who might not be able to hear you when that happens.
So thank you for the advice. I'm leaning in now. Is it any better for you?
Much better, thank you.
Oh, all right. Well, I guess leaning in is the secret of life. Council, you have the minutes of previous council meetings as listed in the agenda. Is there a mover and seconder for them? Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Knoll, thank you. Any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's none. The minutes are adopted. We have no public presentations in tonight's meeting, and we have no standing committee reports for this agenda, but we could resolve into committee of the whole now if two of you would give us a motion and a second. Councillor Elgar and Councillor Giddings, thank you. Any objection? There being none, that carries, and we're now in committee of the whole. The chief distinction is that in committee of the whole, we don't need a seconder for motions. We still need a majority to pass. The first item is a consent item, the corporate policy update. Staff are available if you have questions. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to accept, to receive the updated. Councillor Chisholm, thank you. Any objection? There being none, Councillor Chisholm's motion carries. There are no confidential consent items, and we have a handful of discussion items tonight, the first of which is the COVID-19 update with a presentation from Jane Closey, our Chief Administrative Officer. Let's give our attention to Ms. Closey.
Mayor and members of Council, at the beginning of September, the Provincial Science Table brought forward their modeling, and it projected that we would be reaching 4,000 cases by October, and in a worst-case scenario, 8,000 cases, quite a significant rise in the fourth wave. At that point in time, they strongly recommended that we needed to reduce our contacts and take other approaches in order to at least not achieve that worst case scenario. So looking back over the last month of September, Ontario has seen an improvement. Our rolling 7-day average is now sitting at 606 cases per day, whereas at the beginning of September, it sat at about 710. Cases per day. So we have seen an improvement. Our vaccination rates are also improving. We have about 80% across the province that are fully vaccinated at this point in time. Today, the science table came out indicating that we have seemed to be flattening the fourth wave. All very positive news. However, they did say that the situation is fairly fragile. That with the onset of the cold weather and people coming indoors and the rising increases of the cases among children all make the projections forward very difficult. And they've said that there's a high level of instability in their projections. And the range of their projections is an estimate of 500 to 5,000 cases per day. So I think that the bottom line in this is we still need to reduce our contacts as we move forward because we're still in a fairly volatile situation that we need to manage very carefully. So on September the 22nd, that was last Wednesday, we saw the implementation of the provincial mandatory vaccination certificate, which requires that into non-essential facilities that all patrons be fully vaccinated. So the impact to the town was that it affects our recreation and cultural facilities predominantly. And so in response to that, council, to the provincial requirements to require the mandatory vaccination, we brought forward the policy that council approved at your meeting on September the 13th. And as part of the implementation of that policy, staff have been developing a series of procedures in order to ensure that we've got those safety elements that you had approved in your policy implemented in terms of our approach in many situations. So in terms of the visitors at our recreational centers, as well as at Town Hall, that is a non-essential service that's directly implicated by the provincial requirements that require really anyone over the age of 12 to enter those facilities only when they've been fully vaccinated or have some type of an accommodation. The province did provide a bit of an exemption for those between 12 and 17 who were coming into the facilities only for the purpose of an organized sports event. We, in our analysis of it, and in consultation with our sports groups and thinking of safety first, which has very much been the policy that council adopted, we adopted the same approach that the province has in terms of an exemption, but only until October 31st. At that point in time, we'll look at all people entering from 12 and older to be fully vaccinated within our recreation facilities. And that's certainly in line with the consultation we had with our sports groups. So since the implementation of those requirements, it has been fairly smooth at our recreation centers. Our visitors have generally been respectful of the process they need to go through as they enter. We have received some requests for accommodations from the public, and we're reviewing them and evaluating them. We'll get back to those people who have requested accommodation. And we're analyzing them on the basis of the medical requirements that the province has set clearly out the 2 exemptions that are permitted, as well as in light of the Human Rights Commission and what they would require during the time of a pandemic. So that analysis is going on now. As you know, the passport didn't just apply to our recreation facilities, it applied to many other businesses that were considered to be non-essential by the province. And so I have asked Jim to follow up my presentation with a presentation on our enforcement approach and what has been going on there so that we could address any questions you may have on that front. So he was going to follow my remarks. So just walking through each of the other procedures that we've been developing over the last few weeks. You had seen actually the town policy for town staff and our vaccination procedure that was required by the medical officers of health. And of course, that requirement is that all staff for the town of Oakville, full-time, part-time, contract, all those different areas need to be fully vaccinated by October the 31st. So we did ask staff to identify their vaccination status by September the 20th. And that status has been updated on a daily basis. So as of today, I'm actually very pleased to report that about 97% of our staff have declared their vaccination status. And of those 97%, 96%, just over 96% are fully vaccinated or will be fully vaccinated by October the 31st. So that is really great news in terms of the staff that you have. In terms of the tenants, this was another area we needed to look at within our recreation facilities. We have had regular discussions with the tenants, and we will be requiring that visitors and staff of those tenants in the facilities that we operate. So those are facilities that are located, for example, within our recreation centers. Excuse me. So it will require that all of them abide by, in essence, the town policy of visitors and staff being vaccinated. Sorry. As I had said, this applies to only facilities that we operate. If someone else operates a facility, then the policies would be applicable as they apply them, not necessarily the towns. There is one exception to that. Pine Glen Soccer has indicated that they're completely compliant with the town policies, and they will be then requiring that all their visitors and their staff comply with what the policy approach is of the town. And so the final procedure that we're preparing is for contractors and consultants. It'll take us a little bit longer to finish this one. We are looking at all the existing contracts we currently have. Some of them could be quite long-standing requirements or long-standing contracts. We're looking at contracts that were in the middle of awarding, and we're looking at what should be our future requirements. So that's a much more lengthy and complex process to look at those legal contractual arrangements that we have. So we are taking a little bit more time to ensure the development of that policy. So Mayor and members of council, at this point, all of the town's facilities are operational. They may not be operational to what the pre-pandemic levels were. They can't be just because of the capacity limits that the province applies, as well as any kind of other constraints that we would put in terms of screening and those types of things. But they all are operational, which is, I think, important for us trying to carry on a little bit more of a normal life. The benefit of the approach that the province has taken and then the complementary approach that the town has taken to your policy and procedures hopefully will keep us in a place where we can keep our facilities open so that we can best serve the community to the extent possible during this pandemic. So Mayor, members of council, I would like to ask Jim Barry, your Director of Municipal Enforcement, if he could come and give you an update on the enforcement side. I think with all the changes in provincial legislation, that would be valuable. And then after that, both Jim and I are available to answer any questions, if that would be agreeable.
Welcome, Mr. Barry.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council for having me here tonight to speak about municipal enforcement and our ongoing pandemic response. As always, municipal enforcement has a similar approach to all types of enforcement, and we focus on compliance. We focus on complaints based on, or response based on complaints and risks, and proportionate enforcement based on the issue we're dealing with. This approach is used whether it's COVID enforcement or our routine daily enforcement that's conducted on an ongoing basis. As you can see from this chart, enforcement activity has continued in a similar trend as in 2020, with 2021 showing 70% higher than similar activity in 2019, which we're using as our baseline number for this chart. I'd note that parking enforcement has been removed from the chart. As you'll recall, we implemented special provision areas across the town, which is something that wasn't included in the 2019 or 2020 numbers. So to make everything even, we've taken that out. But the enforcement activity is clear. It's gone up in 2020, 70% over baseline, and in 2021, 73%. Enforcement in parks and waterfront areas also continued to drive workload in 2021. This chart includes cases that were opened during the 2021 year, or the year that's identified on the chart. As you can see, this summer mobile compliance officers, park officers, and park ambassadors conducted over 13,000 patrols of our town parks. Many of those patrols resulted in warnings or violations. The most common violation seen was use of closed or non-permitted fields, smoking, barbecuing were prohibited, having fires, drinking, and having dogs off leash. Those were really the top hitters for violations seen in parks. But maybe more importantly, staff were able to educate a lot of visitors and help people in the parks when needed. And some highlights of that help include, in May, a park officer was able to help locate a young autistic man and reunite him with his family. In July, a park officer and ambassador doing a joint patrol ran across a distraught woman who had lost her baby. They were able to help reunite the mother and child and resolve that issue. And also in July, a park officer was able to help a young kayaker that had tipped over in the middle of the harbor and needed assistance getting out. So overall, the park program was very successful from both an enforcement standpoint and a community support lens. That being said, I'd also like to note that even with this level of resources, some calls across the town would have sat for long periods of time waiting for officers to respond. This is a reflection of the widespread nature of COVID enforcement, which you'll see on the following slide. But I would say that officers were required to be in a lot of places all at the same time. COVID enforcement, you can see by this slide, is clearly spread across the town. What this depicts are the different calls that officers are responding to in a heat map format. This means that staff are required to respond to calls town-wide, often at overlapping timeframes, which puts high demand on enforcement staff availability. Calls are prioritized. Of course, life safety issues are responded to first, and then depending on the nature of a call, for example, if a call is about to escalate or if it's an issue short in duration, that'll be second. And finally, regulatory types of calls like parking that can wait would be responded to as a last call for officers to go to. When dealing with COVID-specific calls, most take a significant amount of time to resolve. If I were to use an example of the parks, a park patrol usually involves 2 officers and can take a minimum of 1 hour to respond while they go through the park and deal with the issue. Of course, if they actually run into issues, that can extend to several hours while they make notes and deal with the people in the parks and document the issues they observe. Over the summer months, there were several significant calls that officers responded to, most in partnership with Halton Regional Police. I'd highlight that even in the face of significant aggression, which they did see, Our officers handled themselves in each situation professionally, working with Halton Police to de-escalate matters and only issue charges or trespass notices when absolutely necessary. Looking at the resources that Council approved to respond to the pandemic and at our base enforcement levels in 2021, they were significant, there's no doubt. But as we look at winding down the year, our Park Officer and Ambassador program is concluding come the end of October, which will reduce resources. In addition, the 8 additional mobile compliance officers that have been with us since the beginning of 2021 are scheduled to have their contracts end at the end of December. Staff are reviewing this in the context of COVID and including proof of vaccine enforcement and the increasing demands we're seeing from a noise enforcement standpoint and other enforcement requirements. Staff will be presenting Council with some options and considerations in October on enforcement staffing resources. To quickly review proof of passport enforcement, as Council is aware, the province delegated most of that enforcement to municipal enforcement. It's pretty early to tell exactly what that'll mean for resource requirements, but I can advise that we've already received concerns from complainants about businesses operating not in compliance. As outlined at the beginning of the presentation, staff will be responding to those issues based on a compliance-first enforcement methodology. But if we can't get a compliance, we will escalate enforcement options as needed. So we do have the ability to issue charges if the situation presents itself. With that said, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Barry, and thank you, CAO Closey. There's a question or two. Councillor O'Meara, and then I believe Councillor Dudek, and then Councillor Lischina.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Barry and CAO Closey, for that. There was an announcement by Minister McNaughton a couple of days ago about additional funds for enforcement and for a lot of the rollout with regards to the vaccine passports as well. Have we got any further information about what that looks like or what we might expect in terms of potentially keeping additional compliance officers on or before their contracts expire? I know the regulations come in about an hour before it's about to happen, but maybe you can shed some light if you've heard anything on that.
Through you, Mayor Burton, we don't have an update on that. Actually, we're still looking into it, and we're going to have to see what is the implication to the town and the ability for us to secure any funding from it. So we will get back to you on that. I'll probably provide it in an update as we move forward.
Thank you for that. And maybe just to go along with that, I know there's been a lot of conversation about what staff are going to use in our facilities to scan a potential QR code the end of October. Are we anywhere near securing any of that infrastructure, or is that sort of in the wings as well?
Sorry about that, Max on, Max off. No, we are looking fully into what are the requirements for us to move into the QR code that the province will be bringing in, and we have the ability to secure that equipment. So we'll be fully prepared when they move into the QR code to be able to streamline actually the process of getting in and out of the facilities.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dudek.
Thank you. Through you to CAO Closey, I appreciate the fact you raised or highlighted rather the soccer club situation. I'm sure other of my colleagues have had similar conversations whereby somebody has indicated that the town is requiring them to be vaccinated, but the soccer club is not. So what you referenced tonight is that at the end of October, they will be adopting the similar vaccination requirements that we are?
Yes, through you, Mayor Burton. And actually, Pine Glen, I went a step further. They asked to be included in the tenant requirements, which they would not generally be covered in. because they were making it clear they were applying the same thing to their visitors and staff. And in the consultation I understand that we've had with most of our user groups, they've been very supportive of the approach. There was some concerns raised early on that if we applied the requirement on September the 22nd, it did create some difficulties for the continuation of their sports events that they had throughout the fall season. So in consultation with them, we did extend the time frame until October the 31st for just those 12 to 17 who are coming in for organized events. So we have actually great cooperation with the user groups, and many of them are following the exact same approach that the town is.
Super, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for that presentation, Jane. I'm really pleased to hear about the numbers with respect to staff, so that's wonderful. My question was originally about essential services. So currently library and transit. Is that correct? Is there any other services the town provides that are considered essential?
Well, most of the other services, actually the only services that are covered by the provincial legislation would be recreation and cultural facilities and any meeting spaces that we have. Those would be considered the non-essential. So all the other services that the town provides are not really implicated by it, although we don't have a lot of people in and out of facilities that we would do that with. But you're quite correct, transit is essential, as is the library.
Okay, great. And just a question to Mr. Barry with respect to municipal enforcement. Jim, you've mentioned up 73% in 2021. Do you have any stats with respect to business hours versus after hours? Where's the need? Is it mostly through business hours?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have that in front of me. I can certainly provide that. What I would note, just from anecdotally, is that most of our calls do come after hours. It'd be in the evenings and on weekends.
Thank you, Councillor. Next, Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a quick question for CAO Closey, if I could speak. The question is related to the park ambassadors. Did you feel that that was actually an effective program, and would that be a post-COVID program that would continue? And before you answer that, I also just want to commend the bylaw enforcement team for the efforts they made, because I mean, going up 70 and then 73%, the busyness, I know staff were added, but you know, just commend them for the patience and the work that they're doing throughout the last year and a half.
Thank you, and I'm sure Jim and his team certainly appreciate that. They have been extremely busy. It's been a lot of pressure put on that particular staff group. Jim's probably the best one to answer, but I think I can respond by saying that that's exactly the report that's coming forward in October, is to consider what should we be doing with the future of a program, even through the balance of the pandemic, as well as beyond. So I think you'll see that in the report coming forward at the October 18th meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Longo. Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jane, for your presentation, materials that you presented. And I want to thank you for the efforts staff have put into dealing with the proof of vaccination and dealing with the 12 to 17 age group and the allowances that were put into place to make that workable in terms of the transition for everybody. The similar question, though, with respect to the community use of schools and the community use of our own rental facilities, how are the school uses being required to have vaccinations? Is that through the school boards that the school boards have got their own policies, and when we administer the rental of, say, gyms and so forth at schools for evening use by community groups, we're passing on their policy requirement?
So I'm actually going to ask that Julie Mitchell, who should be on the line, address specifically the activities that are happening in the schools. Is Julie Mitchell there?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Burton. Yes, the school board has dictated their policy. So we're passing on the administration of that to the user groups through the school board as the owners of the property. So their stance is following the provincial regulation as it stands. So it's on the onus of the permit holder to ensure they're abiding by the provincial guidelines.
Okay, so we're a pass-through organization with respect to renting out their facilities on their behalf, basically. And so
That's
that is, so all 4 school boards for whom we deal with, they're all in the same boat. They all treat all their renters the same.
That's correct. They have only allowed gyms to be permitted and not their classrooms at this point, but you are correct.
Okay, and is there any likelihood that the classrooms or other parts of their facilities other than gyms might become available to community groups?
Julie?
That's a possibility. At this point, we're waiting for them to advise us on that.
Okay, and that's and they're following provincial regulations on that.
That's correct.
Great, thank you so much for that information for the community.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Barry, just curious in terms of the extra time and the stresses put on your enforcement staff, what kind of effect has that had in terms of being able to deal with property standards, complaints and follow-ups?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The last time I was here, we did talk about the extra time, the different service levels that would need to be adjusted as a result of COVID enforcement. So after that, after speaking last time, we did adjust those levels. I think most levels were adjusted by at least 2 weeks. So rather than responding to an issue within 2 weeks, it was responding to the issue within 30 days, except for life safety issues and COVID issues. So if a property standards matter involved something, an open pit or something that was actually a life safety issue, we would get to that immediately. But if it was something less concerning in nature, it would go on a list and the officers would pick it off in a little bit longer time period than would be normal.
I appreciate that. I know that your resources are dropping somewhat as a result of losing the ambassadors, but at the same time with the cooler weather and perhaps some youth not out quite as late as they may have been in the summertime, does that provide an opportunity to catch up on any of those or shorten the wait time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would probably hesitate to answer that just yet. We're still trying to assess the impact of vaccine passport requirements. So that will take some time, and we still are doing some work in the parks. It's still not quite cold enough to eliminate that totally. So there will be competition for the resources we do have. I do suspect we will go back to closer to normal service levels, though, as we get further into the fall.
All right, thank you very much. And Mr. Mayor, to CAO Closey, last year we had a number of fun events in our parks and open space, winter activities. Are we looking at those again this year, whether it be festive lights, whether it be snowshoeing or any other activities? I know it's tough to tell because we don't know what's coming yet. Just curious about that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we are looking specifically at the winter recreation program. And I know you'll see that as part of the budget deliberations.
All right, and that could include the pickleball courts or tennis courts staying open as long as the snow allows and so on?
Yep, and the Coronation Park event we had with the lighting, a variety of ice rinks and all those types of approaches that we had last year. It is the question on what do we do coming into 2022?
All right, and my last question, Mr. Mayor, it's concerning the emergency management process that we're currently underway. Just wondering if there's any feedback on that in terms of timing or requirements.
Can you be a little bit more specific on that question?
In terms of the emergency control group or just in terms of just decision making?
Yeah, so based on the emergency management plan that Council had approved, We still have meetings ongoing of the Emergency Operation Group. So that's the group that really provides details and updates on the situation and what's happening. And then we have a weekly Emergency Control Group meeting, which is the group that makes decisions in terms of quite often the day-to-day operations, not I guess the policy decisions on how we're going to approach those various issues. And where significant decisions are necessary, we also bring it to the Recovery Committee because we've been in a bit of a recovery as well as an emergency all at the same time, really for the last 18 months. So those are the three forms that we use in order to make decisions in moving forward on the pandemic issues and the emergency management.
And that will stay in place. Is there a time period for that? Or is it dependent on what's going on about us?
It is very much dependent on what's going on about us, the state of the pandemic. We're right now in the fourth wave. We actually hope that we could turn those things down or back a bit, but until we get a better understanding of where things stand with the pandemic and we see a clear path out of it, those meetings perhaps not at the same frequency, but the emergency management pieces will still continue for a foreseeable future. I wish I could project when they'd be done. That would be very good for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Robertson? Councillor Robertson, please unmute.
Thank you for the update. And I did my first program this morning at QE Park. And so for anybody that's watching from the public, give yourself an extra 10 minutes because you have to go and smile pretty for a camera and get a special card that will get you into your program in a more efficient manner from here on in. So those are the kind of good things to know about how it's going, but it went really well and the staff was awesome. So thank you to the staff for making us all safe and welcome. I wanted to ask especially about if we've gone any further for the kids that turned 12 in January, and if we've completed any kind of framework, will they get 6 weeks then to be vaccinated and double vaccinated and clear the 2 weeks afterwards, or if we've come to any decisions about that?
No, it is definitely on our radar. We know that we need to deal with that issue as 2022 comes upon us. But there are really too many things that we felt outstanding with the pandemic. It really does depend on where the pandemic is, whether or not those still requirements are in place, what is the level of vaccination, because there is certainly very positive talk about also vaccinating the 5 to 12-year-olds. So I think there's too many things still uncertain at this point in time. And as we get closer into the year, we're going to have to make a decision on that if all the same things are in place as they are now.
Great, thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslett-Theall?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you, CAO Closey. I have two questions. One is, I've had some questions about the transition if I'm an 11-year-old and as the pandemic continues, how I would access the facility. So we gave them the grace period over the last while to October 31st, but do we or are we going to share a practice around how someone who's 11 will be able to use the facilities while they're working through getting their vaccinations? They may not, like the province right now says they can get them, I guess, up to November, but that date has not changed yet. So do we have work in progress, how we help those young people be able to continue to use our facilities while they're getting vaccinated?
So it was my understanding that anyone who turned 12 in this calendar year was eligible for vaccination. And I had thought that occurred in about the middle of August, which is why we did look at extending the time frame out to give them then the opportunity to get a vaccination. So we extended it out to October the 31st. which allows anyone who's turning 12 this particular year, that's enough time for them to have gotten a vaccination. It also is the same time period that most of the sports groups have also applied, so there's some consistency in that overall timing. So that's how we dealt with the ones that are turning 12 this year. The ones that are turning 12 next year are a bit, I think that's what Councillor Robertson was asking about. How do we deal with them? Because as of January 1st, if the same requirements are still in place, they will have not had an opportunity, we think, to get a vaccination unless they announce something earlier, which may be what you're suggesting. So it's a wait and see to see where we are in the pandemic, how the vaccination program is rolling out, so that we can use the same really approach that we used for those 12-year-olds this year who were late in the year turning 12. We can apply the same kind of approach to the 11-year-olds that turned 12 in 2022 to ease them into it. So I think philosophically, we'll apply the same approach that we have in the clarification we put out just recently.
So thank you for that. As a follow-up to what Councillor Giddings was asking about the emergency management, some of the public seem confused about sort of how decisions get made, what comes to council, what doesn't come to council, and just the emergency management plan in general. Is it possible for you to, and maybe not tonight, but maybe at the next COVID update, take us through the why of the emergency management plan? And I know you use the word foreseeable future, but maybe what the reasons are that it cannot be changed sooner than that, and if there's reasons not to, help the public understand that.
Certainly. I think that would be a good topic for the next update on October the 18th, and we will give you an update on the emergency management plan and how that works and the questions you've asked about.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. A quick question to Jane. Jane, thank you very much for the presentation. And Jim, well done. I know you're under great stress and pressure with respect to enforcement within the municipality on just, quote, the regular stuff that happens, and then we have COVID on top of that. My question is, I guess, directed to Jim with respect to the ambassadors. The ambassador program, filling those positions, were they not transfers of existing staff in the town into the ambassadorship program?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in 2020, that's how we managed the ambassador program. In 2021, we did actually recruit ambassadors, mostly students, to assist in the parks throughout the summer. The same as our park officers. The park officers were actually community college students for the most part in a law enforcement program. So it served dual purpose. It helped them get experience. We could rely on the experience they were getting from their college training, and it created a pool that actually allowed us to develop that enforcement unit for the summer.
Is it safe to say, Jim, that there are no full-time staff now in that ambassadorship role?
There are no full-time staff in the ambassador role. There was only one secondment in the enforcement department from another area in the town, but that was a secondment, not the same as not exactly the same as we did in 2020, but it was an actual applied for secondment.
Okay, so one has to assume if we continue on with the ambassadorship program that you make your presentation on that would be all external candidates coming into those positions. So they're not crossing over from existing staff in the town. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, the intent, and as CAO Closey indicated, we will be bringing something to council on park enforcement and enforcement in general in October. But you are correct. If we were to look at any program, we'd be looking at something that we could bring staff in independent of other programs or other areas, so we weren't depleting their resources as well.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. Question probably for Jim. Sorry, I see you left already. I'm I know that this is an ongoing issue, whether it's pandemic season or not, but I seem to have had more phone calls and more upset constituents about fireworks in parks. And I'm wondering if that was a townwide issue or something just reserved for the residents of Ward 5. I hope not. And if so, is there any, yeah, Tom, I see waving, yep, and everybody. Is there any thought as to how we could better deal with the situation? I mean, I'm assuming that people were more agitated this year because they were home and not going out to events for the various firework activities. But is there any strategy around how we might deal with this differently in ensuing years?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can assure you it wasn't reserved for any ward. Officers were responding to these issues across the town. We have put a lot of thought to this, and the issue isn't an Oakville issue either. In speaking with colleagues across the province, everybody is facing similar issues. Other areas have contemplated bans, but I think we would have to acknowledge that the fireworks that are being set off now are mostly being set off illegally anyway. So banning the fireworks wouldn't necessarily stop people from continuing to break the law. It's really, we need to make sure people still continue to complain, make those complaints, get our staff out there. We'll try and deal with it as quickly as possible. But when the complaints are coming from across town, even with significant resources we had this year, there are many that are going to wait. And that's kind of what I was speaking of earlier in the fact that we're responding across the town. So if some officers are in the east and some are in the west and there's an issue in center Oakville, it's going to be a while before we can get there.
Yeah, I understand the challenge, and nothing I just said would anyway at any point endorse banning fireworks, because law-abiding residents of this community want to celebrate the various holidays and festivities. I'd hate to do that, but it'd be great if, I don't know if there's some way to maybe consult with your peers across the province, and maybe there's best practice research that can be done, but I just know that every fireworks event this year, every fireworks legal holiday, I almost felt like cowering under my bed for the phone calls that were to come, because there were several of them, and people were quite agitated. Second question, this is probably for Jane or somebody from clerks, I'm not sure, and I don't want to jinx the situation a year in advance, but in light of some of the challenges that the federal Elections Canada folks had in administering this election, although it was the federal election, although it seemed to go relatively well, it was a single name on a single ballot, as opposed to the large ballot process that happens for municipal elections. Has any thought or contingency plan been put in place for how the election will be administered in the event that we are still in some form of restriction for the next municipal elections? Has any thought been given to that in advance? Because I know that the other part was even finding staff to work the polls or finding facilities in which to hold the polls was a challenge.
Councillor Knoll, through you, Mayor Burton, it's Vicky. We're actually coming to council in October with a report on our progress and where we're going with the election. Just giving you a few ideas of things that we're looking at in preparation to, just in case we're still in the same boat at this time next year. So we are looking at all of the possibilities of where we can go to make it easier.
Thank you, everybody, for your hard work and for the responses this evening.
Thank you, everybody, for your questions. You've inspired one by me. Madam CEO and Mr. Director of Municipal Enforcement, I'm curious, how does the treatment of youth in our society help or hinder your ability to enforce compliance with our fireworks bylaw in the first place? Do you run into a bit of a problem because they're almost always kids?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, absolutely, and I can tell you know the answer to this. So certainly, as we deal with youth, there's from a municipal enforcement standpoint, and there's two aspects to this. The progressive enforcement policy that was approved by council for municipal enforcement officers, if a youth is identified or defined as a youth under the Provincial Offences Act, our staff won't interact with them beyond calling the police for assistance. And this is because they're treated differently under the Act, and they require special attention, and that attention is not a situation we would want our officers to be involved in. We will engage. If there's a complaint, we'll go out and ask people to stop, and they will generally leave. But if it comes to enforcement, that's something the police do need to be involved in. And many times, if our resources are spread thin, the resources of Halton Regional Police are also spread thin. We do work in tandem in most of these cases, so it does become an issue. But dealing with youth across the town is one of those issues we grapple with on a weekly basis.
Thank you, Mr. Barry, for adding that dimension to everybody's understanding of the problem. Council, would you like to move receipt of the information? Councillor Lischina, thank you very much. Any objection? There being none, that carries. And we now have the next discussion item. Staff are available if you have questions. The motion is to receive and approve the Delegation of Municipal Powers and Duties Policy and Bylaw 2021-77. What's your pleasure, Council? Councillor O'Meara.
Happy to move receipt unless there are any questions from my colleagues, Your Worship.
Thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, the motion carries. Our next more delightful item is the relatively good financial results report, and staff are available to answer questions and discuss it. Jonathan Vander Heiden, our Director of Finance and Deputy Treasurer, Nancy Sully, our Commissioner of Corporate Services and Treasurer, Councillor Adams, and then Councillor Chisholm.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I don't have any questions, and I'd be happy to move the report, but I did want to congratulate all of our staff who are involved in managing all of the town. It's not just our finance staff, but the entire management team that put themselves to work, making sure that we end up with the positive variances that we have under just what I think we can all agree are just incredibly extraordinary circumstances. And so to be getting the positive variances that we're seeing, to have the really strong stabilization reserves to fall back on if needed in terms of managing our affairs, and having the debt structure that we have giving us the flexibility to deal with things. I just wanted to thank our staff for all of those efforts.
Thank you, Councillor. And thank you for the motion. Before we act on that, let's hear the questions and comments from Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Knoll. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Question I have is on the Kerr Street widening and grading separation. I just need to have clarity on this with respect to $12.2 million being turned back in, I guess, under the reserves. And it says refinements with Metrolinx. Can I have just some more detail on why this is happening? And we've tightened up, sharpened our pencils, or whatever the case may be?
Of course you can. Mr. Vander Heiden, looks like you're in the batter's box. Let's see you hit this out of the park.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. It's a good question, and actually there's kind of two parts to the response on it. There is actually a separate report that will be coming with more detail on that, I believe, at our next council meeting, and Jill Stevens' team will be presenting that. The other thing to mention is that it is a bit of a timing issue in terms of when we will be doing that work. So when we bring our budget forward, we'll actually have those costs when they come up. Those will be in the 10-year forecast, and you'll see them coming back in at that point. So it has more to do with timing on that front. So they're not gone, they're just being pushed out.
Thank you, Jonathan. That clarifies it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for giving him a chance to tell us the good news. Councillor Knoll.
I put my hand down. I actually found the answer to my own question. I just reviewed the report once more. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being none, the motion carries. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to ask you to turn to your proposed 2022 council calendar. And The town clerk, Vicky Titanic, is available to answer any questions you may have. And otherwise, it would be in order for a motion to approve it and to move, the 2022 Budget Committee meeting scheduled for November 18th, 2021 to November 23rd, 2021 as a convenience. Councillor Longo.
I'd like to move the motion, please.
Thank you. Councillor Elgar, you had a hand up, or were you just volunteering to move?
I was just volunteering to move.
Thank you. Volunteers are appreciated always. Councillor Haslett-Theall.
I just have one question about when the agendas are distributed and the addendums. So I really appreciated it being outlined in the report, but we're increasingly see addendums 3 days before council or 4, and I appreciate it's been a very challenging time, but some of those addendums are the public really would benefit from having them sooner. So could someone just help me understand from a process perspective, you must have a system for this, a determination of what would be deferred because it may require or it would be appropriate to give the public more time to review it in advance of the meeting. Procedurally, is there a process there?
Let's let the CAO lead off. She is a bit of a gatekeeper on when the reports go. And the clerk, of course, is the keeper of our procedural bylaw, which is the other tool that we have as a council. Madam CAO.
Through you, Mayor Burton. Can you hear me? Is it picking it up? Yep. Certainly the report itself sets out the formal process of timing. What we do at a staff level in terms of looking at the content is those reports that will drive a fairly significant amount of public consultation or really any level of public involvement. We do try not putting those on the addendum. We try moving them to the regular agenda so there is the appropriate amount of time for someone to be able to review those documents. Sometimes I will have to say that because of other timing requirements, I can't say 100% of the time met that because of either legislative timing or some timing that is forcing us to put it on that agenda. But that's what we try and do, and you will see, and I know for the agenda of tonight, there were items that we anticipated to put on that did have a fair amount of public consultation, and rather than put them on the agenda, we actually moved them to the next meeting. So that's the general practice we apply. So it is a bit of a judgment call, and sometimes that judgment call happens just before the agenda goes out, as your clerk will attest to. So I hope that in terms of content, that's the process that we put in place.
Councillor, I would just add that as a council member, council is always free to defer an item if council believes that it needs more public consultation. In fact, this council has done that several times. So if or when you see an item that you think crosses that line, it's part of standard procedure. You have a motion to defer. It takes precedence over consideration of the item. So you're always free as council to make an adjustment in interests of public consultation, or any other for that matter.
But thank you for those clarifications. I just wanted to, for those that are listening in, there were a few that were quite interested in some items that might have ended up tonight, and having them understand from the CAO's perspective how things get on the agenda, and perhaps, as you said, Mayor Burton, could be deferred, et cetera. I know we're all interested in making sure the public feels very involved and informed in our decision making. So thank you for your answers. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's valuable to have illuminating questions, and you've given us one. If there's no other questions, is there any objection to the motion by Councillor Longo? There being none, that motion carries. Thank you. We now have two confidential discussion items, and I've had an indication that council wants to go into camera on one of them. And so I'm wondering if we could act on the rest of the business before we rise and report, so that any public is not inconvenienced waiting for us to come back. The only item that this would amount to would be the agenda item listed publicly as the appointment of deputy fire chief. And if you're of a mind to, someone could move a bylaw to appoint a deputy fire chief and to amend bylaw 2021-126. And is there, Councillor Chisholm is moving that. Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Is there an objection to that motion? Madam Clerk, there being none, and I can report that what council has just done is appoint Andrew Boyes as Deputy Fire Chief effective September 30th. Congratulations, Deputy Chief Boyes. Now, Councillor Giddings, you had indicated to me that you wanted to go in camera for item 11.1, the George Street Parquet. I'll help you out by suggesting that you're moving that council proceed into a session closed to the public in accordance with the Municipal Act and the procedure bylaw, specifically the exception that says the council may do so for litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Is that your motion, Councillor Giddings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Is there an objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, I see none, and the motion carries. Council, I recommend that from past experience, that now is a good time to take a little 5-minute break while we rearrange the technology for a session closed to the public in accordance with the motion we just adopted. We are back in session, council having been in a session closed to the public for the purposes of considering matters subject to, I have my little thing right here. For the purposes of considering litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. While in camera, council issued directions to staff to settle an outstanding matter with the town, and a recorded vote has been called for, and the clerk is going to read off the names of the for and against councillors so that they're in the record for the public. And council, if under our procedure bylaw, you can change your vote, of course, but Madam Clerk, would you now read the vote?
Those councillors in favor of option 1, Mayor Burton, Councillor Sandhu, Councillor Lischina, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Longo, Councillor Robertson, Councillor O'Meara, Councillor Knoll, and Councillor Grant. Those not in favor of option 1, Councillor Haslett-Theall, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Elgar, and Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and thank you, Council. It now would be in order for a motion to rise and report to Council. Councillor Lischina, thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? There being none, that carries. And I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on consent item 8.1, discussion items 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, 10.4, and confidential discussion items 11.1 and 11.2, as noted by the clerk. Could I have a mover and seconder for the report, please? Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Duddick, thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, the motion carries. And the report and the recommendations of the Committee of Whole are approved. We now turn to new business, and I want to thank Councillor Robertson for bringing forward this motion, which is seconded by Councillor Sandhu. And I expect they may each like to speak to it. This is a notice of motion about the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And councillors, please clarify, is it your wish to publish this tonight and vote on it on October 18th? Or do you want to ask your colleagues to waive the procedure bylaw so that you can have this motion adopted tonight? You would like to do both things?
Tonight, please.
Well, then, may I take the liberty of assuming that Councillor Robertson and Councillor Sanju move the waiving of the procedure bylaw to permit that? And I'll now ask Council if there be any objection to that motion. And seeing none, I'll declare that carried. And now, Councillor Robertson is putting the motion, Councillor Sandu is seconding it, and I will turn to Councillor Robertson to speak to her motion, and I've refrained from reading it so that you could, and then we'll turn to Councillor Sandu for her remarks, and then to the rest of us, should you have any. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor. On a personal note, I've had a long journey in terms of reconciliation, in terms of Indigenous history. I grew up close to Walpole Island First Nation. We were not always nice to the kids from Oakville Island. Some of them came to my high school, and I am afraid that I was often the same as everyone around, where we were not nice. We treated them like they were lesser than us. We thought that they got everything free from the government and did nothing for it. We were every sign of why we needed truth and reconciliation. And as my journey has grown, I've read, I've researched, I've taken part in Indigenous activities, Indigenous presentations. I have made amazing friends within the Indigenous communities. And so I wanted, before Thursday's National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, to put forward something that is from the heart for me, and I think for so many here. I know the mayor has done amazing introductions to where we're at in terms of acknowledging our Indigenous roots. The town has its flag now. We also have one to acknowledge the residential school survivors and the children. So I am going to read the motion I'm prepared for tonight. Whereas the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released its final report on June 2nd, 2015, which included 94 calls to action to redress the legacy of residential schools and advance the process of Canadian reconciliation. And whereas the recent discoveries of remains and unmarked graves across Canada have led to increased calls for all levels of government to address the recommendations in the TRC's calls to action. And whereas all Canadians in all orders of government have a role to play in reconciliation, including 8 specific recommendations made by the TRC for municipalities to consider. And whereas recommendation number 80 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission called upon the federal government, in collaboration with Aboriginal peoples, to establish as a statutory holiday a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, to ensure that public commemoration of the history and legacy of residential schools remains a vital component of the reconciliation process. And whereas the federal government has announced September 30th, 2021 as the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, the National Orange Shirt Day, and a statutory holiday. And whereas the Town of Oakville's culture plan and special event strategy commits to supporting Indigenous culture resurgence through creating meaningful experiences for the community to learn about Indigenous history, culture, and the impacts of colonialism to define a reconciled future. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the Town of Oakville does hereby commit to recognizing September 30th, 2021 as the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, National Orange Shirt Day, and encourages residents to participate in the full program of activities such as wearing an orange shirt to raise awareness about the intergenerational impact and trauma of residential schools. Take guided and self-directed walks on our moccasin trails to learn about the history of the lands from an Indigenous perspective. enjoy Indigenous performances at the OCPA, and watch Indigenous films, as well as read books about Indigenous history recommended by the Oakville Public Library. And further be it resolved that staff review the 8 recommendations that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission pertaining to municipal responsibilities and report back to council with a proposed call to action where appropriate. And that an orange crosswalk be installed to commemorate all Indigenous children and demonstrate the town's ongoing commitment to an inclusive community, including our local Indigenous community, and staff report back to council on the funding and implementation plan. And that council directs staff to explore opportunities for further initiatives and partnerships in consultation with our Indigenous community members and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation to commemorate all Indigenous children, support cultural resurgence, and recognize our local Indigenous community. Before I pass the mic to Councillor Sandu, I just wanted to thank our staff for doing such an amazing job of creating opportunities on Thursday for adults, for children to learn more, to be vested in this day and what it means to us. Councillor Sandu?
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. I'm just going to say what she said. Thank you so much for that great synopsis and excellent information. I also just wanted to add on the piece that I thought of as a parent when you had written this up really and taken the reins on this. I think when everybody heard the news about the first gravesite, I think every parent's heart kind of broke. And if it didn't, I don't know if you're truly a Canadian or even truly a person. As a parent, I can only imagine that type of loss. And I hope that everybody takes the time on Thursday, at least in the town of Oakville, to remember those children and remember how much these communities have lost. I commend our staff as well. Thank you all. And I will, Mayor Burton, also ask for a recorded vote so that we can all truly feel the same way about this.
Thank you very much, councillors. I would add my praise to you, each and every one of you, members of this council. You have been, each of you, exemplary and together as a group, great in terms of making sure that our community can move forward in an ongoing, inclusive way so that we all work together to include everyone in the great future that we can build together with Truth and Reconciliation and truly become Canada's most livable town. You have really done wonderful jobs over your varying lengths of time on council. And I am just so proud of you and so proud to have worked with you that I hesitate to think that I've actually gotten the thought across. The words almost fail me. You are fabulous to work with. I will ask the clerk to call the roll by way of a recorded vote. Madam Clerk?
Mayor Burton,
Yes.
Councillor Adams,
Yes?
Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Chisholm?
He's looking for the
Oh.
mute button.
Sorry, yes.
Councillor Duddick,
Yes,
Councillor Elgar,
Yes.
Councillor Giddings,
Yes.
Councillor Grant? Yes, okay. Councillor Haslett-Theall,
Yes.
Councillor Knoll,
Yes.
Councillor Lischina,
Yes.
Councillor Longo,
Yes.
Councillor O'Meara,
Yes.
Councillor Robertson,
Yes.
and Councillor Sandu.
Yes.
I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Are there any, I'm not aware of any requests for reports. Are there any surprises in the category of requests for report? Councillor O'Meara?
Sorry, Your Worship, you just moved off the congratulatory quicker than I could get my hand up. I did just want to issue a congratulations to our two Oakville re-elected MPs, MP Anita Anand in Oakville here and Oakville North Burlington MP Demoff as well. I know it was a tough campaign, and I just wanted to offer our congratulations to the both of them. Thank you, Your Worship.
Well, thank you, Councillor O'Meara. On behalf of Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Duddick, I'd like to extend the congratulations of council to Oakville resident Lisa Hefner, who's lived here for decades and surprisingly won election to Parliament from Hamilton Mountain. So we share an MP with someone, in a sense. It reminds me of the days when an Oakville resident named John McCallum lived in Oakville and represented a riding in Markham. So, Councillor Duddick?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I also want to, on the same vein, say a huge thank you to the various businesses and locations who stepped up and provided a safe environment for our members of the public to vote in this election. As you can imagine, it was a very difficult situation given the pandemic, and we had quite a few last-minute changes taking place. And the Elections Canada staff and the volunteers should be commended for doing it safely and efficiently.
Thank you. I think that's very nice. And my personal thanks and congratulations to the two members of council families that I'm aware of. There may be more. Councillor Adams' daughter and your husband served in the election. And so, you know, good on them. Councillor Knoll?
Well, in recognition of true electoral equality, I also want to say a huge thank you to all the men and women who put their names forward in the election from other parties who kept our democracy alive and the debate vibrant, interesting, and brought great value to this whole process. So thank you to all of you, and I hope that if you're listening or you hear about these words, that you will consider competing again in the future, because that's what keeps our democracy working so well.
Thank you very much. Well said, Councillor Knoll. Councillor Duddick?
Sorry, Your Worship, I'm remiss congratulating Councillor Knoll on his fine performance on our local Cogeco station with Councillors Kearns and Hamid from Milton. They did a marvelous job commenting and providing the returns as they came in.
Thank you.
I would just ask Councillor Knoll, was it a habit-forming experience?
Oh, you betcha. I want to do it again. It was a lot of fun.
Well, they say it may happen again soon, so you may get the chance.
I didn't mean that. May it last 4 years.
All right. That being said, would it be in order for me to ask for a mover and seconder for consideration reading of the bylaws? Councillor Elger, thank you. Councillor Giddings, thank you for moving and seconding. And is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection to the motion. The bylaws are considered and read. And Council, it's been terrific working with you, and that ends the meeting.